It's 8. So we are doing a watercolor marker workshop. This was by request, so you guys can kind of see an array of the markers we're going to be taking a look at today. I am trying something new and I don't know how well it works. You guys can actually see my face because I have the face cam on. We're also running a piece of software. What are we running in the background? VCam to delete the background, which is why I have this like weird halo around me. So rather than using a green screen and then cutting out around the green screen, it's just trying to cut out my environment without any sort of green screen at all. So that's something new. You actually get to see my face. Usually I am not comfortable showing my face on YouTube, but with COVID and people being kind of isolated, I thought this was something we could do to help people feel a little bit less lonely. So today, yes, I know it is not a true green screen. It is VCam. So rather than sitting with a screen behind me, it's just cutting out my environment, which is a room. So hi Tali, good evening. Hi Calvin. So I kind of want to give people more of a chance to get in here. I'll go ahead and share this on my social media. So what's going on with you guys? What have you guys been up to today? So rather than sitting with a screen behind me, it's just cutting out my environment. Hi Callie, good evening. Hi Calvin. So I kind of want to give people more of a chance to get in here. I'll go ahead and share this on my social media. So what's going on with you guys? What have you guys been up to today? Fun assortment. Yes, it is a fun assortment. I have been collecting water-based markers almost as long as I've been collecting alcohol markers, so I have a lot of them. And some of these are markers that are maybe not sold in the iteration that I own, or they're being discontinued, or they're harder to find, or whatever. But we're going to take a look at a bunch of them. Drawing patterns for parrot species. Ooh, that sounds like a fun activity. Today, so recently I started this how to draw flowers project. So I'm going to do like 12 different flowers and I'm recording videos for them. So I'm 3 days in. So that and another thing are what I've been up to today. Yeah, it has been a while, Tyra. Good evening. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and get kind of rolling with the water-based markers. So I did a big Twitter thread earlier in the week, like yesterday, to kind of talk a little bit about water-based and watercolor markers, to talk about the different types, and to just give some prep to help prepare for today. So basically we have 2 types of watercolor markers that's going to be worth mentioning. We have pigment-based watercolor markers like the Winsor and Newton watercolor markers, and these are actually on their way out. They're going to be discontinued. And the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers, which they're pigment-based, but they're India ink pigment, so they behave a little bit differently. Then we have dye-based watercolor markers like the Echo Line watercolor markers and the Spectrum Aqua. I believe these have been rebranded as something else, but that's what I have. I mostly have dye-based watercolor markers because that is what's the cheapest to make, so that's what kind of predominates the availability. So I'm going to make some desk space, get some paper on the table, and we'll start talking about these. Hey Nisa, good evening. Yes, I was originally checking it to make sure it actually started picking up the feed. So thank you for letting me know. I'll pause it. Aha. All right, so this is what I'm going to be using today for testing and demonstration purposes. For the most part, I prefer using watercolor markers on cellulose-based watercolor paper rather than cotton rag watercolor paper. Cellulose pigments and things tend to not soak in, they tend to sit on the surface, so it does offer some different working properties than working on cotton rag paper. I can show you that there isn't necessarily that big of a difference between watercolor markers and water-based markers. It's mostly just in branding and in body type. So these are Crayola Super Tips. This is a really common brand of water-based markers here in the US. You can find them almost anywhere. I know they're not as common other places, but this is what we have. These are dye-based, very inexpensive, washable, so the dye is designed to wash out. There's a little bit of glycerin to help with that. But these can also be used as watercolor markers, and at the end of this stream, I'm going to update the description to include links to a bunch of tutorials, but there's going to be a big blog post on the blog soon that kind of talks about this a little bit more in depth. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a few different dye-based watercolor markers. Then I'm going to go get a cup of clean water. Actually, a water brush would work a lot better for this. So I'm going to go get a water brush, and I'll kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. But there isn't really a big difference between water-based children's markers and watercolor markers. You really kind of want to experiment though, because some don't work as well as others. Like the bigger bodied washable Crayola markers, the ones designed for younger kids, those do not work well as watercolor markers. So I'm gonna go get a water brush and I'll be right back. Sorry. You're onto something there, B. A lot of companies will basically market their cheap dye-based, water-based markers as watercolor markers when they're not really. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the Crayola Super Tip. So I have a few tutorials here on the channel where I show you guys how to use Super Tips as watercolor markers. One of my favorite techniques is to apply it to a non-porous surface, so like a glazed ceramic plate, a glazed ceramic palette, or even just some scrap throwaway plastic works really well for this. And then to pick up the color as you need it, and then you can just paint with it. And Super Tips are really, really, really cheap, so this is a very economical way to use these. If you get in with them really quick before the color has a chance to soak in, which is why I like using cellulose paper because it just sits up on the surface. You can blend it out pretty cleanly as well. And then when it dries, you can always layer over it again. So this is one of the Spectrum Aquas. My color might end up kind of muddy because I haven't cleaned it out. You can also use regular watercolor brushes with these, like a cup of water and a brush. The water brush is just convenient because it takes up less space and it's kind of all in one. And the hibiscus that you guys see on the screen, that's going to be a little bit later on tonight, after I kind of demonstrate and talk about these. So really when I'm looking for watercolor markers, if I'm specifically looking for watercolor markers and I'm specifically looking for dye-based watercolor markers, is I'm usually looking for a brush tip. So this is a compressed fiber brush tip. It doesn't have a lot of flex, but at least it's not going to tear up the paper surface. Generally what I really prefer are like the Echo lines. These are cool because you can refill them and they have matching inks that are commonly sold, so you can refill them using an eyedropper. You can also turn the nib around so you can get a little bit more life out of these. I wish they sold empties of these because I'd really like to put my Radiant watercolors in them. So the problem with aqua brushes, if you squeeze too hard, like if you're heavy-handed, they're gonna bleed all over the place, they're gonna leak water everywhere. If you're working in a hot environment, they're gonna leak water everywhere. So they are not, not the best tool a lot of the time. So what's good about this foam rubber brush is it's a lot like the Copic Super Tip brush. It's soft, it's flexible, you can do really fine lines, you can do really thick lines. It's not going to tear up your paper surface. That's the area most people have problems with when they're using water-based markers on paper, is since water evaporates much slower than alcohol, if you have a tip that doesn't have any sort of give to it, it's going to start tearing up the paper. Ooh, I misspoke. It's actually a water lily. I apologize for that. So then you also have, this is considered a brush pin. It's the Pentel dye-based brush pins or art brushes, but they can be used like watercolor markers. And these are nice because they have individual nylon bristles, like a real brush. You can put down a lot of color on the paper. They're not going to tear up the paper surface. They're also highly water reactive. So that's one of the pros and cons of using dye-based watercolor markers, is they're very water reactive. So like sweat from your hand can reactivate them. Just breathing on them can sometimes reactivate them. Working in a humid environment can reactivate them. So then they'll get all over your hands, or they may get all over the artwork itself. However, dye-based colors, they are very bright. Sometimes they feel very very synthetic, like this brown here, burgundy, sorry, it feels very synthetic. But to make a very long story short, basically the only difference between inexpensive children's grade watercolor markers like the Crayola Super Tips and a nicer dye-based watercolor marker is the packaging and the branding and the price point. You can use these for watercolor almost as well as you can use these for watercolor. You just have to have a few extra tools on hand that'll help make it a lot easier. So in my opinion, where it starts getting a little more interesting is when we're talking about pigment-based. So these were really exciting to me when they first came on the market. They use real pigments. So for example, this is, where's your color name? Quin Magenta, right? And it's a series 3 and it uses pigment PR122. So it uses pigments that match the watercolors in the Winsor & Newton brand. It's double-sided with a brush tip and a bullet tip. The brush tip doesn't really have a whole lot of give. And the bullet tip often doesn't get enough pigment through it. This one's actually in really good condition, but I have a bunch of them that I've had to toss because they basically just died without even getting used up because there just wasn't sufficient flow. What I'd like to see in watercolor markers is actually a pump action. So kind of like this Molotov Graphics Aqua Ink Pump Soft Liner. Now, this thing's kind of neat. It's refillable. You can see how much liquid is in the reservoir. It does have a brush tip, and it is, you can pump it to get more liquid flow. I wish more watercolor markers were made like this, particularly the pigment-based watercolor markers. Now, these things are really expensive. They're like 10 bucks a pop, so they're pretty expensive. I don't know if you could refill it. If one of these ran, hey Jill, good evening. If one of these ran dry, I mean, you don't have anything to lose. The problem is, I've never tried dissecting one of these before, so I don't know what end I would try to do that with. And then also you have the burden of kind of color mixing, but it's not that big a burden. That would be an interesting thing to test. So recently, Faber-Castell released the Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers. And like I said earlier, these are pigment-based watercolor markers, but they use India ink as their pigment. So unlike, let me see if I can find one that has some granulation. Unlike the Winsor & Newton markers, which use watercolor pigments, see, and some colors don't blend out as well as other colors. Let's see, this would be one. No, I'm surprised. Okay, it's running a little bit dry here. So that is what? What color are you? Yellow ochre. So you see there's also a color difference between what the brush tip is able to produce and what the bullet tip is able to produce. And I think having a pump action to help force that color would help a lot. And these markers have been stored horizontally, by the way. So equal ink dispersion should be happening. What I'm trying to find is one of these that has some granulation to it. And it wouldn't be much because you really have to mill these pigments finely for them to flow. But you can see with these pigment-based ones, we're getting some movement, but it's not nearly as much movement as we're getting with the dye-based ones. So working on a non-porous surface as a palette is going to be really important. Yeah, yellow ochre has a mind of its own in these. And one of the blues, I think, has some sedimentation. Normally, ultramarine, that's mid-blue. We'll try that. So the problem with the Winsor Newton watercolor markers is it was a really good concept. The execution is just not really the best. What would have been great would be a refillable marker that you could just mix up the pigment like Calvin said and refill it yourself. That would be amazing. So this is the same marker. It's mid-blue. You get a very warm blue from the brush tip, and then from the bullet tip you get a cool, almost phthalo blue because it's kind of sedimented out. What pigment does it use? PB15 and PV23. So probably the smaller pigments are able to get through the brush tip. I mean the bullet tip, my apologies. I'm gonna try one, no, it's a phthalo. I wanna see if I can find a ultramarine. I don't have one. That's kind of surprising for me, but I don't have one. So never mind, I can't try that. All right, so we were talking about these. So these use India ink. So you're gonna have no granulation. The color is gonna feel kind of flat. I do like the brush tip on it, and I do like the amount of ink you get out of it, but it's basically using the same pigments as pit pens. So once it's had a chance to dry, it's not really going anywhere. Which could be good. You can paint over it, you can layer it, but it does need a lot of work to make it feel more lively. And I would love to see a watercolor company offer watercolor markers, like more watercolor companies get into that. Like I'd like to see, I don't think Daniel Smith's gonna do it because that's not how they do their pigments, but Daniel Smith do watercolor markers, or Da Vinci do watercolor markers, but those tend to be smaller companies. So I don't think we're gonna see anything like that from them. So that's kind of the difference between dye-based watercolor markers and pigment-based watercolor markers. Oh, hey, hey. Oh man, come on. That's a habit I've been working to break, and I'm doing better on it, but it's still a work in progress. It's not touching my face. Okay, so for the next thing I want to show you guys, I'm going to grab some salt. I'm going to grab some clean water, and we're just going to grab one of the dye-based. And I'm just going to, so this is one of the Jane Davenport mermaid markers. So it's one of the brush pen style ones. There's a lot of different brush pen style markers on the market. I happen to like this in terms of it really puts down a lot of ink. It also is way less likely to tear up your paper. There's a breather tube in these though, and that makes squeezing them pretty difficult. So right now I'm just trying to make a mess. I have yet to find a pigment-based watercolor marker that can put down as much wet color as these dye-based ones. And I've tried making my own homemade watercolor markers using like a pre-mix of pigment and water. My problem with that is because there tends to be like a little filtration sponge in a lot of these things, it gets caught up in that, and then it clogs, and then it never works again. Probably just the solvent that they use. So one of the nice things about using dye is that it moves a lot. And then if you were to let it dry and spray it, it's going to move the color a little bit, and it's going to give you these areas of kind of like white freckles. Sometimes with art supplies, the only thing that changes is just the packaging. Like the product inside is the same. Like if you look at Derwent, the Inktense blocks use the same formula as the Inktense pencils. They're both an India ink based pigment. The only thing that really differs is like the packaging and the form. And then the Inktense painting blocks are just the Inktense blocks in a different form factor as well. No, I've tried that, Calvin, and it clogs on me. The pigment clogs on me. You can do it with, I've done it with fountain pen ink. I've done it with just dye-based watercolors. But if I use any kind of traditional watercolor, I mean, I guess I could go with something very, very finely ground, like a Quin. Like Quin Magenta might work for that. But it really wouldn't be as much as I would like. Actually, on that note, I have something that might be very similar to that. Give me a sec. Okay, so a while back, De La Rowney sent me a bottle of Aquafine watercolor ink, and they also sent some FW mixed media paint markers. So I filled one with ultramarine dark blue. This has been sitting around for a while. And this is a pump action pen. So I think if we could do like pump action brush pens, that would be, because then you can force the pigment a bit more. But like if you guys have hydrous, you'll notice that hydrous tends to sediment out. That's what's going to clog. So this right here is a little sponge, and that tends to get clogged. And then once it's clogged, it's kind of ruined. So I mean, you could make your own watercolor markers like this one here. But honestly, that would get really expensive. These empty are a little bit pricey. And then having all the inks and then filling them all myself, that's like a whole project. Yeah, it is like a watercolor Posca pen. I would rather just buy it from a company if a company made it, you know? Let me see. So one of the other things about, and this will work too with any kind of watercolor, is you can do the salt technique and it leaves like salt blossoms. Of course, if it's sopping wet like that, you're not going to get salt blossoms. Yeah, it turns into like cement at the bottom of the bottle. So I'm going to move these aside and make some space on my desk because we've talked a little bit about watercolor markers. And I did have some more I didn't show you guys. The Karen Pro. And these are really more aimed at brush letterers. These are cool though. You can see them, see the ink through them. Have a nice kind of form factor, and they also have a really generous brush tip on them. Oh, I was listening to the Baby Metal concert earlier today. That was a really good way to start the day. So the Karen ones have some flex. They're dye-based. They're a little bit harder to get over here since they come from Poland. Oh my gosh, you guys can't be kicking my knees! That's why I didn't want to have my face cam on ever, ever, ever. Y'all got me. Yeah, I know. I'm going to do this and then I'm going to wash my hands real good. I'm so sorry. I'm a human and I goofed and I forgot that the face cam is often... Wait, I forgot that the face cam is on because it's usually not. I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to go wash my hands and hide my shame. You still laughing at me? No. My shameful self. Right? I'm not used to being watched. I usually use the salt texture for just to add some like visual texture, some interest to the piece. You can see it's kind of pushed some of the dye back there. It's pushed it some over there. So for me, it just adds kind of like a white noise or a grit. But I've also used it to kind of indicate like flowers or snowflakes, or even help indicate like it's gonna rain, like a cloudy sky. Yeah, that's the thing, is I've been really trying to break a bad habit. I'm one of those people who, I touch my face, like I'll rest my hands on my face, I'll rest my face on my chin, stuff like that. Just trying to break old bad habits that need to break anyway because they make me break out. Okay, so I'm going to clean this mess up a bit so I have a workspace, and we'll move on into kind of the main meat of tonight's workshop. Salt can force some granulation, but what it really does is it pushes the water out, and it also pushes some of the pigment or some of the dye out. So what it leaves is more of like a white spot. But it's not like fully white. It's not like if you dropped rubbing alcohol. So for tonight, what I want to work with is I'm going to work with dye-based. I say that and then I'm like, maybe I want to work with not dye-based. Yeah, I often touch my face as a way of self-soothing, so I'm trying to break that now because it makes me break out. If only I had an infinitely large desk. Wouldn't that be great? And then I got hair in my gum.
Hair in your gum?
Yeah, I'm having a real...
The other way around?
Huh?
So you don't...
No. I got a hair in the gum that's in my mouth.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes. Clearly, I was purpose made for human existence. That's right. The floor is my infinitely large desk. How did you know?
I said that before you started placing pictures, actually.
Did you? I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the workshop part of tonight, we have an illustration of a water lily. I scanned it and I shared it with my art nerds, so if you're a patron, you already have access to the black and white line art for this. You're welcome to print it out. I can't draw on the floor anymore, but I do paint on the floor, but I have an anti-fatigue mat, and that thing is amazing. It's probably solely responsible for me being able to get up. So one of the reasons for tonight's workshop is Tali asked me about combining watercolor markers with watercolor and watercolor pencils. So I have here the Core Mini Palette. It's just one of my favorite watercolor palettes. I'm going to go clean this palette out, go get a cup of water, some paper towels, some brushes, and get back to you. So I'll let Joseph come sit here and... No? You don't want people seeing your face? You're busy. I would get Bowie too, but he is asleep in his Amazon box. If I make weird, funny, stupid faces, I only half apologize, because like if it makes you laugh, that's great. But I make really weird faces just naturally while I'm working, so... How do I manage to draw flat? Oh, like flat on the table? Okay, so if you're drawing flat, right, and you're sitting like this, you're going to have some distortion. So if I'm just drawing and I'm not like recording what I'm drawing, I prop it up and draw it. Or sometimes I will place something under it to help prop it up. But often I'm just sitting in my chair like drawing. But once I have the main sketch in, I'm not so worried about distortion. So I can ink with it flat. I will also frequently stand up and do my base sketch so I can see things from a better perspective. I can get the whole view, and I'll also frequently take breaks and check what I'm doing. Oh, hopefully y'all could hear that. don't really mean like run-of-the-mill mid-sentence weird face that like, yeah, you pause a video at the wrong time and it's a really terrible face. I mean like, I just make some really goofy faces when I'm thinking sometimes. I'm surprised I don't have more problems. I've been working on sitting up more, and since I go for walks really regularly, that actually has helped a lot. Yeah, the paint pots are the best. That's like the only ad on Amazon, Instagram that I'm like, yeah, I hope you get more business. Almost got the trash can. Would have been great, even though y'all would not have seen it. Okay, so someday I'll have a way bigger desk and I'll have room for everything I want to be on my desk. But today is not that day. So I'm gonna find my mouse. And I'm gonna bring up a larger reference image just because my eyesight is terrible and I can't paint from that tiny little reference image on the screen, y'all. I just can't. All right, Joseph, so I cannot see the chat anymore. So if anyone has any, pop it on out. Are you suggesting I pop it on out?
Yep.
And right now I'm getting my cheap little phone stand from Five Below already. And I'll record a time-lapse version of this like I did with the azalea, or I'll sure try. I have a feeling I'm going to run out of phone space. And double check. Ooh, that doesn't work. I love how when I stand up, y'all get the best shot. Just
Of your torso.
of, yeah, like my
No,
unicorn.
it's mostly faded into nothingness.
I know, it's really quite charming. Like wow, I'm a ghost. You'll also get some free ASMR as I chew gum. Okay, now we got it. So, for this, I want to start with finding my reference. I'm going to start with the watercolor, and then I'm going to use the watercolor markers and to kind of help pull in more detail. I could use just the watercolor markers for this. I do have other tutorials where I've done that, so I'm not super concerned about covering that. So the first thing I want to do with this is I want to get started on the background. We'll even have a fancy time-lapse version available for you guys later on. I've gotten really spoiled by doing all the origami paintings with the Mozart kit because all my colors are pre-mixed. So I want to start with kind of that. We're going to start with a yellow actually. And I'll apply some of my phthalo blue wet into wet so that we can get kind of a softer diffuse blend. So I'm working on cellulose paper. This is Canson XL watercolor paper, and that means it's going to dry kind of quick. So instead of what I would do with cotton rag, which is I would kind of fill areas in and then go back in and add my wet into wet, I'm going to do it lily pad by lily pad. So in my part of the world, Nashville isn't like super all on top of each other here, which has its pros and cons because transportation is a little bit frustrating. Our public transit is not good. On the plus side though, it means I can go for walks without being afraid of getting sick. And I feel like I've been particularly blessed by the porch kitties who deign to let me pet them. I mean, of course, I then go home and wash my hands because those are the times we live in. But
Calvin Zero asked if Canson XL is a cellulose paper.
it is, yeah. It is basically like a heavy cardstock with a little bit of watercolor texture embossed on it. I like it because I can find it almost anywhere in the U.S. Like even Walmart, like even our big box cheap stores have it.
So they add the texture afterwards? The texture isn't natural?
No, the texture is not natural. I mean, it's added during the manufacturing process, so it's embossed onto the paper after the paper's been made,
Yeah.
rather
So it
than like
dries
a
and then they
handmade
press
paper.
it.
No, they probably press it while it's still wet and malleable. So you can do this with water-based marker. You would apply it like we are with the pigment, the half pan pigments. Apply it to your palette and then add some water maybe and use that to cover a larger area. But this is a bit quicker and possibly, depending on what brand you're using of watercolor markers, a little bit more economical. I mean, if you're using Crayolas for this, it's hard to beat 100 markers for $14. That's just a price point that's difficult to compete with. I should have clipped this. It'll dry pretty quick though. While walking today, the lady who lives in the house that, this is going to be hard to explain. She has like the best house. It's painted fuchsia. She's always got these gorgeous flowers in her yard. Like it just looks like an artist house. And I guess she is an artist because she was out doing plein air painting of her garden today.
And so Naphtali Albert says, yeah, it is. I have like 2 pads of it, haven't touched it. And Calvin Zero said ever since they went to Japan, he finds everywhere else's public transportation sucks.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that. They've got a really nice system. I'm definitely envious. Public transportation in the US out of like major cities is pretty hit or miss, pretty terrible. I've got Baby Metal stuck in my head. You know the ending song, like the anthem? Always on your side. Do do do. I guess I know what I'm going to listen to once the stream is done for the night. Nothing wrong with that. That was a really good way to get my morning kind of kick started. I wish they had been around when I was in high school. I was both so cute and so full of anger. So for this green, I'm just using a really cool yellow with some of the phthalo blue that's in the core palette. And I'm actually painting really thickly. I don't really plan on doing too many layers with this, so thick is okay.
Calvin asked if you were goth, Becca.
I was actually. I was what would be called after I graduated high school, like candy goth or pastel goth, but they didn't have those terms in Podunk, Louisiana in 2003. And I got picked on by the other goth kids a lot for not being hard enough. I was a angry small. Okay, and then I'm just going to use a little bit of the phthalo blue. See how quick it's already dry? It's still like curled, it's still cold to the touch, but like we're not getting the like really nice wet into wet blends that we would if we were using a cotton rag. But I actually really like this paper because it means I actually will use it. We're just going to keep our water lily leaves really simple. I'm not going to render them too much. They're not the focus anyway.
Did you take that picture?
No, I didn't. I know, I'm really bad. It is Bergen Water Garden though. And they sell beautiful water garden plants. You grabbing a link for the folks at home?
Yep.
Touching that face again. You know, I also bite my nails, and I have actually managed to stop that because of this, so. That was a habit that needed to stop. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry, and I'm gonna go change out my water cup. Oh, awesome.
Calvin says, talk about bad paper. Traveler's Notebook watercolor paper. It's like they made it with wax paper. It's difficult trying to get watercolor to stick on it.
Ugh. That sounds awful.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Is it more like a rice paper? I know their paper in general is supposed to be like amazing for fountain pens because it's a like almost like a mulberry paper. I had an elastic. Dang, Tyra, that's impressive. Talk about good mileage. I'm glad you're getting so much use out of them. They'd probably be amazing for travel, too. Okay, so next thing I want to do is this is going to be hard because we have some wet areas. What I'm kind of thinking about doing is doing, actually I'll just do it and we'll talk about it as I do it. So what I want to do with this, if you look at our reference, oh, that still has some blue in it. Paint puck, you failed me. We have kind of a diffused blend at the center, like with the gold. So what I want to do is I want to encourage that. So what I'm doing first is I'm just kind of pre-wetting the paper so it'll blend a little bit better. Now we get to do some color mixing. I want to kind of clean that palette out a little bit because it's gotten kind of polluted. And then a little bit of orange. And I plan on going in with the watercolor marker and just kind of tightening everything up. Controlled chaos is like one of my favorite watercolor techniques.
Neftali says your hair bun is so cute.
Oh, thank you.
And Calvin says, but one good thing about it is because watercolor have a really hard time sticking on it, it lifts super easily. It's talking about the paper.
Yeah. Also, just like in the time I've spent looking at Calvin's art on the paint box, I know that Calvin has a lot of determination. So I kind of feel like if anybody has the stick-to-itiveness to make that paper work, it's going to be Calvin. Or to find a technique that really works well with it. So what I'm doing now is I'm creating a thirsty brush. So I'm dipping it in the quote-unquote clean water. It's not clean anymore. And I'm dabbing it against the paper towel and using it to soak up some of these water puddles. So that way it'll dry a little bit quicker, hopefully.
Calvin says he thinks your hair might be haunted because it's disappearing. It's getting cut out. And Tyra says you tried Daniel Smith watercolor too, though, but no, I only got the 3 5mm tubes in primary colors for cheaper than Amazon was selling them.
Where'd you get them from? It's usually pretty easy to find. Better deal. Amazon just tends to be kind of expensive. They've gotten better, but they're kind of pricey.
You also have to wonder what their storage conditions are like.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have no idea right now. That would be curious, especially because like art supplies are not considered an essential. That's a.
I mean, there are people working in those warehouses.
Yeah, I know.
That
You say that, but. Kind of a loaded topic. And I'm just going to mix a little bit of Quin Magenta with the Dioxine Purple. I want just a little bit. I really don't want much because I really want to use the markers to do most of the work.
Bomber B said he did what he did with the center, but he's using core and the color exploded.
Oh yeah, this is the core mini palette, but they do handle a little bit differently than the, like, if you dry core out in half pans. I like it a lot. I use this palette all the time. But core has a lot of color. That's one of the reasons I really like it. But because I want to lift this center anyway. If you got too much color and it's still wet, oh, that's a really, ooh, sorry, that's a really good deal.
That's like the equivalent of Craigslist, right?
Or
no, it's eBay because they ship it.
I don't know. I see the commercials for it. Mercari, didn't it used to be a Japanese only site? I want to say it was. I'm probably wrong about that. It was probably a different Asian country only site, because Mercari was around when I was like in undergrad. I had a friend who got anime goods off of that site. I was back when it was like a holy grail.
You get your figs.
To get, yeah, for real, figs back in like 2006. That was a whole challenge.
I think I only ever bought one, and it was from an anime con. No, two.
I'm surprised.
Video game figures count?
Do what?
So do video game figures count?
Yeah,
Okay.
I count that.
5 figures in my life.
Wow. What much nerd. I have so many more figures.
Yeah, you have more than that of Animal Crossing figures, right?
Those are amiibos. Excuse you. I only have one Isabelle Nendoroid.
What's the difference in an amiibo and a figure, other than one has an RFID chip?
Amiibos can communicate with your video game. Excuse you. Whereas figs don't. When amiibos were first released, I stupidly thought they were stupid, but now I obviously do not think they're stupid. I guess I think...
bought them before I knew what they were.
Yeah, you thought they were just figurines.
I pre-ordered them. I was like, oh, that's cute. There's nice Nintendo figs.
That's how Nintendo is training a whole new market.
We got you one and we gave away the other 2, right?
Oh, yeah, that's how I got my Peach.
Frankie and Alex, I think.
Probably.
Your head actually was in the shot briefly. I jokingly told people to tell you your head's in the shot because you have face cam. But your head was in the top shot briefly.
Joseph is a troll. So it's starting to dry. See, this is one of the things I don't like about cellulose paper is you start getting uneven drying. So some areas have dried and some haven't. I'm still going to do it, but I kind of regret being like, we're going to use watercolor markers because I really like this so far, and I could make this look really baller in just watercolor.
So I said flower explosion in the chat because, you know, the person was talking about
Core.
And now there's discussion about it being a Pokemon movie.
Is there a Pokemon movie?
No, they just said it sounds like the name of a Pokemon movie.
I mean, is He-Man in the chat?
No, it's Calvin Zero.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm sure Nemo would latch on to that. She would describe the movie's plot in full, were it to exist.
Okay, that needs to dry before we can start using the markers. there's some artists who've been doing chat streams every day, and I have like mad respect for that because that must be exhausting. I like chatting with y'all, don't get me wrong. It just starts to hurt my voice after a little while. Just the oof. Big oof. I wanted the merest dab of Payne's Gray in there just to add in some shadow. Man, the problem with doing a dual recording is 10 minutes slips by super fast for me.
I don't understand why there's a 10-minute limit on.
And this, because it was painted basically dry, I'm gonna just dab up a little bit of it just to, so it's like the same color and it dries at around the same pace. Okay. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll just go ahead and start the background. Oh, Gesundheit.
Thank you.
So I'm mixing some burnt umber, a little bit of Payne's Gray, and some phthalo blue to get kind of this like murky yeah, that's the color I want. It's like a murky blue-brown. It's not a color description you frequently hear. So Maddie in the paint box has been talking up Jackson's for a long time. Calvin has too. I finally checked it out last night, and y'all aren't wrong. The prices are really good. I was checking to see if they had any of Shinhan's Korean colors. They don't. They do carry PWC though, but their prices for some things are so much cheaper than what I'm used to.
Is that a store, a manufacturer?
It's a store. It's an online store, an online art supply store. And they were recommended to me because I've complained before that I'd like to do more with Schminke, since everyone swears Schminke is so great. But it's really expensive in the US, and Jackson's has a good price on it. They also carry a larger selection of the White Nights watercolors by Yarka, and some Polish watercolors as well.
Calvin said, it's a good thing they never considered turning all the Pokemon Monselli into amiibos, otherwise their wallet would drop.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Tyra said her sibling's been going to online school.
Well, that's cool.
One brother's grades were bad, so my mom took their phone until he gets his grades back up. The problem is that he did school on his phone.
Ah! Maybe that's why his grades are bad. I imagine it would be hard to do school on my phone.
Calvin said Jackson Art watercolor is pretty good and economic, but its range is very small.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at their
agrees and that the shipping is reasonable. Your head is way in the shot now. It was.
Sorry.
I mean, it wasn't what you were painting, but you're covering up half the painting.
Yeah. I apologize for that. I really need new glasses. Like, I'm like 7 years out of date, need new glasses.
I'm like 9.
Yeah, well. Yes, you're correct.
If only you were right next door to a glasses shop every time you visited my work.
You sassy boy, aren't you?
I think they just take your prescription. I don't think they
Exactly. And the thing
I don't think they
is,
can give you a
I do
prescription.
actually have astigmatism in one of my eyes. So I do need, like, you know, an ophthalmologist. I mean, for what that's worth, I have a cousin who, she is an optometrist. Oh, that's not going to be a good enough match. Oh, well.
Shamelessly Creative said Jackson's Art Supply really has a great selection of paints at good prices, and they ship fast for cheap. They also have Roman
Yeah.
watercolor.
Yeah.
I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right. But,
I know what you're talking about.
and Naphtali said that's why I do everything on my laptop, because you have a laptop. I assume you're talking about Tyra's product.
School, online school. I know the younger generation, I say, sounding older than I am, but that's okay. Things have changed a lot, really. I always had trouble with online classes because, I don't know, there's just something about being in a physical class that is very helpful for me. So my heart goes out to a lot of the ADHD and students with learning disabilities, because unless their parents are like teaching them as they go along, they're probably struggling pretty hard. I mean, for me, like, just thinking about who I was in high school, my grades would, if this happened when I was in high school, my grades would be in the garbage. And I was an A student just because the temptation to play video games all day, the temptation to have Ragnarok Online running in the background would have been a temptation I could not resist.
Did Ragnarok Online have a story?
It did, and I did not care. It wasn't a particularly good.
It's like WoW story.
It is a lot like WoW Story. Which, like, if you're into that, that's fine. I'm not. It just wasn't for me. Like, I didn't care about that aspect.
It helps that Warcraft had a story before WoW existed. Otherwise, WoW's story would be nil, basically.
I mean, Ragnarok had a manga for a while.
Oh.
Or, well, a manhwa. It was a Korean comic. And I tried reading it because they had one of the DizDev artists do the art for the manhwa for a while. And I love the art, but I couldn't get into it because I just 100% don't care about the story.
Calvin says I need new glasses. Nighttime's getting hard for them.
Yeah.
Jill says, feel for the parents of the younger kids who are attempting to step in and homeschool
Ooh.
learning.
Yes. It's a hard time for everybody right now.
And Calvin says online class is nice and all, but nothing beats having a teacher with you. Natalie agrees, and Tyra says, we do have one laptop and one desktop for the whole household, and the problem with that is growing up for me was that she had 21 siblings
Yeah.
to share with.
Yeah.
It was a war to get the laptop.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it was just me and my brother, and it was still hard to get on the computer. I can only imagine how challenging it would be with a bunch of siblings. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of parents who are having to step in and teach their kids material that it's very different from when we were in school. Like, I've seen examples of new math, and I have friends who are new math teachers, and they were taught how to teach it, and they love it. But I also have friends who are parents who are trying to pick up and teach this, and it's like, can we just go back to multiplication the way we used to do it? Ooh. Stepped on my lavalier mic cord. Y'all are just getting all the ASMR sounds tonight. Gum smacking, drinking water. Okay, so obviously, huh?
Face touching.
Let me just, yeah, let's get real. Ooh, boy, this thing is shedding like terrible. I was gonna do like, oh, face. Let me just apply the makeup.
Wow.
I tease, but I actually really enjoy certain ASMR makeup videos. They're very calming for me, so that's me teasing out of a place of love. So what's going on now is I'm letting this dry, and then I'm gonna put this away so that I'm not tempted to do the whole thing in watercolor. And I actually use the watercolor markers that I told you guys I would use. So I'm gonna get all this cleaned up and hope it evaporates. Other problem is if I have a camera on my face, I'm gonna ham it up for the camera. I don't know if that's a problem.
That's what every YouTuber does, right?
I don't know. Hey Joseph.
Yes.
Why don't you ask the chat what they think of current manga naming conventions?
Says they had more siblings because their dad never really stated the exact amount of kids he had before me. Calvin says people say Bob Ross is the original Asmar, but I'm not sure I agree since Asmar videos don't work for me. But I like Bob Ross paint. He says your mom should be blessed. It's me, one girl, and 4 boys who are older than me.
Calvin, have you seen the Mike Not Jerry? That's the grandson of the guy who started Jerry's Artorama, which is a fairly large art supply chain here in the U.S. He has a YouTube channel where he does stuff for Jerry's Artorama, and he decides to paint along with a Bob Ross video, and it doesn't go very well. I find Bob Ross very relaxing to listen to. He doesn't trigger the ASMR relaxation response for me the way like makeup tutorials do. There's just something, because it's really tied, it's really closely associated with like being in high school and doing makeup for my friends and them doing my makeup, and like how relaxing that was. So I think if I didn't have that like strong association with events that happened in my youth, then it probably wouldn't do anything for me. Like the eating videos just gross me out. I like the drawing videos too. My frustration is often the person who's doing it is they're not an artist. And that's fine, but they're also they also don't know how to fake it. And that's where, cause like you probably feel, I don't know if you've watched any of those, but my brain starts like pointing out all the things that I'm like, no, that's not how you do it. No, that's not right. Ah, don't do that with your fingers. And then I can't relax. Waiting for it to dry. It's getting there. That's one of the reasons I went with cellulose today, is it does dry faster. And I already removed all of the watercolor from the table, so I won't be tempted to fall back on things I'm overly comfortable with. And that's okay. I do use watercolor markers fairly often, not all the time, but frequently enough. Like at least once a month I pull them out and I do something with them. So I'm not necessarily concerned about that. I just don't want to find myself constantly reaching for the core palette when I promised I would do watercolor marker here. So what I want to do, and I'm not going to consider this cheating, because it's a valid technique and because it tends to tear up the paper if you do direct application too much. Sorry, just setting the secondary camera up. Okay. So I'm going to squeaky. Apply some, and this is Quin Magenta. So we talked about this one, PR 122. I also grabbed Dioxazine Violet, which is PV 23. So we're going to be mostly, at least for this part, we're going to be mostly using the pigment-based ones. What's nice about the pigment-based ones that I didn't mention earlier is the pigment-based ones are going to be more light fast than the dye-based ones, which are very, very light fugitive. Oh, Gesundheit. So I'm using the palette here just so I can mix some water in. And something else you can do, but you really should be careful if you choose to do this, because you can get what's known as blowback, where the water goes back into your marker. But you can use the tip of your watercolor marker to add some color wet into wet here. That's going to diffuse a little bit better.
Calvin didn't seem too happy with the marker squeaking sound.
Yeah, they're kind of annoying. I kind of like the sound only because it's like, oh, that's going to be easy to clean after. I know, it's awful. And these paint pucks, so that's these little silicone squiggly bits in the bottom of my paint cups. They're supposed to do a really good job cleaning my brushes, and they work better than not having anything. I'll give them that. They're just not working as well as I might have liked tonight. Did you ask the question about manga titles?
Yeah, no takes.
Okay. Can you provide some examples? He's not talking all manga. He's talking about a very specific genre of manga that's very popular right now.
I mean, the one that most
Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Joseph was complaining up a storm earlier today about how manga titles have gotten like really long now. And I understand the necessity for that. It's because a lot of Western fans have complained that manga titles don't necessarily reflect the actual name of the manga in Japanese, etc., 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 etc. And this is often a more direct translation than what was previously given. Honestly, I'd be fine if they just left the name in Japanese. I'm currently reading, I'm reading a bunch of different things, but since the library is not open right now, my reading has kind of slowed down. But I was reading Teasing Master Takage-san, which is also on Netflix, and the title makes it sound a lot more iffy than it actually is. It's actually a really cute light romance humor manga about a middle school girl picking on the boy who sits next to her in class, who she has a crush on, and it's really sweet and very tame. But the title is a little bit like, what? It's cute. If you're looking for something that's just kind of like a heartfelt, feel-good read, especially right now when people just really kind of want to be maybe distracted, that's a good pick. Joseph found it first. He was watching it on Netflix.
Calvin says, oh, my favorite long title manga name, Do You Love Your Mother and Her Two-Hit Combo?
What was the one? It's something Rascal Bunny Girl.
Yeah, so I posted, suppose a kid from the last Dungeon Boonies moved to a starter town, Volume 2. And I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level, Volume 7. But, yeah, let me see. The Rascal one isn't long, I just don't like it. Rascal does not dream of Bunny Girl Senpai.
And these are like Yen Press titles, right? Yen Press is real big on like the super literal manga title. Ah! I ran out of space on my phone. My funicular divicular. Give me a sec. I actually have something I can just totally delete. And what I do with this footage is I time lapse it and I voice over it. So for folks who do not want to sit through what's looking like it might be a 2-hour live stream, they can watch the short version. And I can actually delete the Azalea video from last week because I finished voicing it and editing it a couple days ago. I really enjoyed seeing y'all's art that you painted along with that. That kind of made my day. Okay, that should be better. Like, when we're talking about these titles, we're not talking about the content itself. I have, other than Teasing Master Takage-san, which I like, we're talking just about like the super long title.
Ira says she finished watching Beastars I assume she means makes me feel so much feeling that at times it makes you forget that the characters are furries or are able to connect with them.
Beastars is great. The manga's really good. We've started watching the anime recently since it's on Netflix now. You can tell it's CGI, but they did a really nice job with the CGI. And the fact that they're anthros, I kind of like that actually, because it makes a really nice allegory without, in my opinion, without it getting like too heavy-handed. I don't know, it's kind of a nice change of pace. Calvin's favorite noise. Squeaky, 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 squeaky. We were watching the Monster Hunter, right? No, Dragon Quest, right? It's the Dragon Quest movie earlier today.
Yes.
It's not bad. I mean, it's not. If you like Dragon Quest, it's probably amazing.
We haven't finished it.
Yeah. It skips a lot of the story, which, I mean, I feel like it was made for fans to maybe share with someone who isn't into Dragon Quest yet, to be like, this is awesome. It's well animated though, and the voice acting's pretty good. So it's clear that like whoever brought it over here cared about the project. And this is just kind of a slow process. Are you laughing at me? Oh, I thought you were laughing like, yeah, I know, watercolor is often a slow process. If you're open to reading shoujo and you're looking for something that is very not run-of-the-mill and is actually very smart and doesn't have a predominance of sort of the negative tropes that plague shoujo, My Little Monster is surprisingly good. It's a lot of, like, I feel like one of the major themes of it is respecting yourself, respecting others, friendship, finding common ground, overcoming family issues. Like, it's just a genuinely good comic. I was actually pretty sad when I got to the last volume. No. My cat's snoring in the background. He's 10, but he acts like he's 18.
When he's not acting like he's 3.
Yeah, right. When he's not acting like a kitten. So for my Animal Crossing friends, depending on where you are with your islands, today was the fishing tourney until 6. And they've kind of changed it up from how New Leaf did the fishing tourney. Because in New Leaf, it was like, I think it was like the biggest fish won the award. Whereas now, you have to catch at least 3 fish. And then every fish you catch after that, wow, can I talk? Gains you extra points, and you can exchange those points for like fish swag. Fish swag.
Like,
I'm not
bedazzling the fish?
No, you're bedazzling yourself in fishing things.
Okay, so like a fish hat and
Probably. I got like a fish magic wand that will change my outfits. I haven't really messed around with it yet.
Tyra says a webtoon they got into recently was Ghost Theater.
Ooh.
Comic Arts is also an animator.
Ooh.
And Naphtali says they've been enjoying Fate Grand Order Absolute Demonic Front Babylonia. Sounds intense.
Fate is usually intense. The only Fate series that isn't like super intense is the cooking show on Crunchyroll. It's like the daily menu of the Emiya family. So for the Fate fans in the audience, if you've ever just wanted to see your precious babies enjoy a calm evening, that's the one.
Jill said you had me at the words fish magic wand.
Jill, I think you would get a lot of enjoyment out of Animal Crossing because it's just such a chill, laid-back game. Either that or it would feel too much like real life, because that's kind of the existential dilemma I hit last night when I realized I was grinding to pay off my mortgage. I was like, oh, I don't know about that.
Tanner said daily menu is so good.
It's really laid back and chill. There's a couple of isekai cooking shows like that. I'm not normally into the isekai myself, but there's a couple of good ones. It's like flip. Could you look it up on Crunchy? It's the one where it's like doorway to another dimension is a good one, and then there's another good isekai cooking show. They're in my watch list. I love cooking animes. I like anime about making anime about drawing. It should be in the Verve list because I kind of moved away from using Crunchy just because Crunchy tends to be crashy.
Fate Stay Night is a top pick for you. Oh, and so is Fate Grand Order.
Because I have the Emiya family thing in there. I couldn't get into Fate. I had a friend who was really into Fate, and he kind of spoiled the show for me, and he told me who died, and I was like, I can't. It was the character I liked. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So, but that character is alive and well in the cooking show version, so I can do it.
I went to watch list and it's just showing recent activity.
So with dye-based watercolor markers, you can use this technique, but you see how I'm often layering over it with like another really wet glaze of it? With the dye-based markers, that's not always gonna work. Sometimes it will reactivate and lift up, and sometimes it won't, and it can be kind of hard to predict when it's gonna do that.
Tanner said Restaurant to Another World. I know
That's one of them.
Joe Bassett says watercolor marker is wonderful. I haven't seen this done until now.
Oh, cool beans.
Tanner says Animal Crossing is way more engaging than The Sims. And Jill says that in response to what I was saying about the dazzling fish, I'm picturing fish trophies hanging on the wall covered in sequins and shiny things.
I bet you could find a big mouth Billy Bass and bedazzle that.
No, they have to be living fish.
No!
They have to choose their accoutrements as well.
But
I don't want to be the person to dress up.
You're not. You're not.
I want to be a seller of the
fish fashions.
Yes.
All right, somebody's got to draw it now. Is that going to be you, Joseph? Are you going to draw that? Nope.
Calvin says her current favorite anime is Hataku Saibo. Sell at Work. Sells at Work.
Oh! I like
Joe
Sells at
Bassett
Work too.
Says, did you hear about Netflix posting spoiler billboards to get people to stay at home?
No. That is evil and genius.
Tyra says, I get into watching JoJo Bizarre Adventure.
Oh, yes. Is it the one on Netflix? There's a few, right? We're watching the one on Netflix, and it never fails to deliver. I also really like Cells at Work. It's a really cheerful anime. The manga's good, too. And there's like all these spin-off series for it now. No, I hadn't heard. To be fair, I haven't really been driving a whole lot since I drove back from Louisiana. So I just haven't been out on the road. But I haven't seen that. There's also not, for me, I'm not like a big TV watcher, so there's not a lot of series that I think Netflix would benefit from spoiling. You know what I mean? Like, I don't watch the popular stuff usually, so I might be immune to that, but if they started posting like anime spoilers, it might be a problem. I'm kind of a homebody anyway, though, so.
Naturally said Special Ops Magical Girl Asuka was really good.
Ooh.
If you were into a military style magical girl.
I don't know that I've ever watched a military style magical girl, so I think I could be into
I
it.
started watching it, and it wasn't for me.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, but was Sailor Moon for you?
I never really gave Sailor Moon much of a try. So
Oh, you don't know? Well, it's not as ridiculous as JoJo's, but it is pretty ridiculous. But it also knows it's being ridiculous. And if you watch the old dub, which is where my heart is, Serena knows she's like 100% ridiculous, over-the-top crybaby.
Honestly, I think I would probably watch either the new one or the Japanese version.
Wow, you could do that. I won't.
What's more ridiculous, Slayers or Sailor Moon?
It's like asking what's more ridiculous, JoJo's or DBZ. It's like they're both very ridiculous.
JoJo's is way more ridiculous than DBZ.
Yeah, but DBZ takes itself very seriously, and that sometimes, but not all the time. And that is also kind of ridiculous. Something else I like about using a brush and water with this technique is we're able to get kind of softer brush strokes, more organic brush strokes than we'd have access to if we use the brush that came with the Winsor Newton watercolor marker. There we go. Brain is entering shutdown and play Animal Crossing mode. And I even took a nap this afternoon so I would be mo fresher, mo better for you guys. It did help.
It's turning out pretty well.
It's coming along. It's coming along.
It's not quite as vibrant.
I'm not there yet. I'm not done. Because it's also more purple. Also, you're looking at it, it isn't as vibrant as I would like. That is true. But you're also looking at it on the screen, and this camera desaturates things a lot. Because I was kind of, when I looked over,
Adjust the saturation.
it's always done that. So, it's just kind of a mix, a little A, a little B. I could also just scribble this directly on this Teflon, very ugly Teflon desk cover. This is a little easier to clean though, so. Okay, so a while back, sorry about that. A while back, we applied some dioxine purple using the marker. So what's nice about using a non-porous ceramic surface is you can see we can reactivate it very easily. Sorry about that. I know that's not anyone's favorite ASMR sound. So our reference water lily has this really nice kind of fuchsia thing going on. So that's what I'm trying to recreate by layering our magenta with a little bit of watered down dioxine purple. I'm also going to brush just a little bit in while it's still wet, so we get kind of a nice diffused blend. And this area dried, so we're just going to blend that out. There we go. It does start to look a little bit muddy though, and part of that is it's just hard for me to build up the saturation I want with the pigment-based markers. I could switch over to the dye-based markers and that would give us that really clean saturation. Which honestly might work because we already have some like texture to the paper or some texture to the paints.
Calvin says they don't like military-themed shows very much, but they love Saishu Heike Kanojo, which is a 90s anime of a high school girl who gets turned into a military weapon. Joe Bassett says, technique is giving me some ideas. I'm new to watercolors, and this would allow me more control over how much to use. Thanks for doing the live stream.
Ah, no problem. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. So what I think I might do, because I'm not getting the delicacy of color that I really want with this, is I think I might grab some of my dye-based markers and try going over it with those and see if I can't get kind of the more vibrant colors that I really wanted for this.
Tyra says she's her most scared magical girl theme anime is Freaking Magical Girl or ORE comedy wise, and Magical Girl Sight or Sight in Tragic Side. Bombi said theirs turned into a big old mess.
I'm sorry.
Sounds like you're not doing a very good job explaining there.
Break it up.
Or are you going to blame it on their art supplies?
No. B has good art supplies. B, if you can't salvage it, post a picture to in the paint box. I have Discord turned off right now, but I'll take a look at it and see if I can help you troubleshoot it after the stream. If you're working on a cotton rag paper, that honestly could be the problem because those they hold on to moisture longer and they just handle differently than cellulose papers.
Calvin says, talking more about animes, she can turn into a cyborg, which she can turn into weapons, but she still looks like a high school girl. So the last thing her enemy saw is an innocent-looking high school girl can turn her arm into a cannon. Sounds like genocide. Naphtali says they finished watching Gear, which is a musical but action-based magical girl series.
Ooh, there's like so many different magical girl series out. I'm super behind the times. The last one I watched was Madoka. Yep, a while back. Honestly, when it comes down to it, I'm really into seinen stuff. So I've been reading again, which is great. It's by the artist who did the character designs for Yuri on Ice. I'm also reading Moteki. It's by the same creator. I really like her stuff. I actually like both of those a lot better than I liked Yuri on Ice. And Yuri on Ice is great. It didn't do for me what it did for other people, but I liked it. Whereas again, and Moteki kind of hit those notes for me. And I think it's just the difference between, like, I often connect better with characters in manga than I do watching the anime. Probably because I'm honestly spending more time with them, you know what I mean? Like, since I'm reading it, I'm internalizing it differently, and I can hear their voice in my head, and it's just more of a involved experience for me. Whereas with anime, it becomes really easy for me to just accidentally start to tune things out, especially if it's in English. Then I'm usually doing something else, and I don't get as attached to the characters. Something that is just like universally good, especially if you like tiny people, is Hakume and Mikochi, which is this really just sweet, soft, kind of escapist manga about, I don't want to call them like wood elves because they're not really wood elves. They're kind of like Lilliputians, but just more. Can you drop a link?
From Amazon?
It could be Amazon. It could just be the IMDb page, just so that people can kind of see what I'm talking about. But there's cooking, and there's animals, and there's cute tiny people things. What?
I didn't know how to spell it, and it came out as two sumo words, so a bunch of sumo stuff came up.
That is not it.
I know.
But I would love it if they did some sumo.
Makochi and Hakuho, which
That is
very
not.
sumo-based.
That is not correct.
You can tell where my mind is.
You ready? Joseph likes sumo a lot. He's ready for the. Is it the spring basho or the summer?
It's not. I don't think it's.
It's not.
In those, there's one every odd month.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All I know is, oh, it's sumo time again. Sumo's on. Who am I cheering for? Little Inho. He's my favorite. He's so fierce. He just always gives his all. I mean, I'm also recording, so. Anyway, I'm going to have to cut that from the other recording, but it's really cute. It's really heartwarming. The art's really, really nice. There's some alcohol in it, so I wouldn't necessarily call it like an all ages kind of book. I often get asked by like parents, like, hey, what can you recommend for my like 9-year-old? And then I'm always in a pickle because it's like, well, if you're going to read it with them, then I can recommend other things because you'll be there to kind of navigate their experience with them. But if they're reading it by themselves, that causes a different problem. But I've been enjoying it. It's really charming.
So Bumblebee said it's a Stillman and Burns sketchbook.
Okay.
Does not seem to like the market.
That could be. Tanner, if Allie's around, would you ask her advice on that? Because Allie loves the Stillman and Burn and has way more experience with Stillman and Burn than I do. I think the paper's a little thin for my taste. Like I said, that this is like a thick cardstock. The Stillman and Burn papers are a lot more like cardstock.
Kitty Cat says they're thinking about watching Cardcaptor Secure.
Yes!
Calvin says maybe watching something new. Cardcaptor Secure a clear card.
Ooh, that's true. Something new and still beloved.
Joe Bassett says, can you recommend a brand of watercolor marker that I can start with if I like I'll go get a higher quality brown.
The problem with that is the cheaper ones are dye-based and they handle differently than the pigment-based ones. So what I would actually recommend you do is I'd recommend you get a pack of the Crayola Super Tips. You can get the 100 pack for 14 bucks. And if you're using like a ceramic plate or a ceramic palette, you can do what I'm doing with these and just scribble it on there and then pick it up with a brush. It's not going to handle quite the same way that the pigment ones will, but it's a really, really cheap way to do it. And you're going to really be able to get kind of a feel for how, you know what I mean? Like how you want to approach the art. Or you can get like the 20 pack. Like you don't have to get the 100 pack.
Tara says her favorite manga is Reborn Princess Knight. It was remade version of Princess Knight from the father of manga.
Oh yeah, Tezuka. Princess Knight.
Says Akame and Mikoshi is super cute and adorable.
It is. It's so heartwarming.
Allie says her favorites are the Beta and Zeta, my favorite watercolor paper.
Right. Does she have any tips though for like, has she used watercolor marker on it before? Any tips for that? I haven't. That's why I'm asking.
And Bomber B says probably just gonna gouache over it.
When in doubt, gouache it out. Okay, so I'm not getting the color I want. So I'm going to switch over for a little while to dye-based ones. And I should be able to just color on top of it. This color is not as pink as I want. I don't know that I have a better one though. Okay, well, we can try switching over to the Faber-Castell ones and then maybe doing, if I'm going to do that, then I'm just going to use the Faber-Castell ones. And just blendy, 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 blendy as I go. Like I said earlier, I do wish there were more watercolor marker options from big name watercolor companies, because with some competition in the market, the prices could go down, and then I could recommend kind of like a student level pigment based watercolor marker. So you see they're not really blending out a whole lot. If you do indirect application though, you can get more of that blending. Which is good, because if you just use the marker tip, especially as the marker tip starts to get kind of run down, you don't get as nice a line, so you can kind of make a more organic line by also bringing in the brush. And I'm doing that here on the underside of the petal, where if you guys look at the reference, you can see we get these pink and purple striations kind of going into the bottom side of the petal.
Tanner says she hasn't tried markers on it. They're doing dinner and it's loud here. Byron B says the marker was like soaking in and bleeding instantly.
Oh.
Tyra says she made a mistake with this drawing, forgot to color a whole selection, and thought I was done, so started to ink it out until I missed the whole section.
Oh, at least you caught it though.
Bomber B says they're going to try to speed run on through some Grumbacher watercolor paper.
Let me know how that works out. I kind of like the Grumbacher watercolor paper. It's got this weird like gelatin coating on the outside, which makes painting on it kind of weird. But I would think it would take, given that coating, it might take the watercolor marker a little bit better. I love when everybody's like making art in the chat. Because then it's more like we're actually just hanging out, you know? We can also layer the color to kind of build up the intensity, like you would with watercolor. Not every color is going to deliver that, so it's your mileage may vary. It's great when it happens kind of thing. I hope you guys are all watching Izoken, or I highly recommend, if you are not, that you give it a try, because it's great. Oh, Gesundheit. Did you sneeze into your sleeve?
I sneezed into the crook of my elbow.
Check plus. Good sneezins. So other than the weird phasing in and out of existence, do you guys like the face cam? Does it help to see like there's a human behind the voice and not just a weird white talking cat? Is it distracting? One of the reasons I personally kind of leaned away from doing face cams for a long time is I felt like personally it kind of distracted away from what I was trying to accomplish. But, you know, as time progresses, especially now where, shoot, most people are under some form of quarantine or they can't leave the home, or, you know, they have a safer at home directive, I know that being able to see other people's faces and see their facial expressions and stuff, that helps a lot. So I've kind of revised my opinion on it, but I want to hear what you guys think.
Natalie says it helps. Tyra says the paper I have that she hates, I think,
Yeah.
with is freaking Strathmore Vision Mix Media. It bleeds through with marker, even with just normal Sharpies. It tears apart with paper and pencil.
Ooh.
Off. Yeah, it sounds like the paper is good for almost nothing.
I have some that I got by accident because I was trying to buy the visual journal, which I really like, and they are often sold on Amazon, like they're interchangeable, but they're not. And I haven't tried it, and you're not selling me on it, Tyra. Making me glad that it's just sat unused. That's so frustrating though, especially like if you get like a sketch you really like and you're all excited about it and you're like, yeah, this is gonna look great, and you think you know how the paper is gonna behave because it's mixed media paper, and it's not like mixed media paper is this unique unicorn in terms of handling, and then you go to use it and it's just like, nope, not today. It's the worst.
says a face cam is fun. Jill says she likes seeing your face, but the flickering is distracting.
Yeah. We will continue to work on the flickering.
Joe says he likes it. Calvin is not commenting.
That's fine. Can't talk. An abstain is fine. I've done it without a face cam for years, so it's a little weird for me to get used to. So what I want to do, because if you guys look at the reference, you get like a little bit of like a pinky purple where overlapping petals have kind of cast a shadow, and some of them are doing it and some of them aren't. So I want to kind of reinforce that to better define our form and to create more depth. We'll fix the flickering though. I'm not sure how, but we'll do it. Like, I'm not sure if it's the camera, because I'm using a cheap webcam for this and a nice webcam for the art, or if it's the software we're using, or if I need to try and set up a kind of a screen behind me. We like kind of half tried that the other day and it didn't make a lot of difference.
Yeah, but that's using VCam.
Right.
If you had an actual green screen that
Right.
was properly lit,
Right.
then you wouldn't need to use VCam at all, because it wouldn't need to be AI driven. It could just be conventional
Right.
software driven.
I mean, the technology for that has been available for a long time.
Yeah.
No, I was just kind of like troubleshooting it, but only like half doing it. Okay, that's a bit better. I'm still not super happy with the color saturation we're getting, but frankly, I am not sure that with the materials I have, I'm going to get a whole lot better, especially because the color I wanted to use as my pink is not quite right. So we're just going to roll. Huh?
On that subject, Calvin says he has trouble getting watercolor to replicate the types of purples that's in the flower.
Yeah, that is such a, especially on a screen, it's almost like a fluorescent. So with pigments, I don't know that. I want to say rose of ultramarine in a tube. It's not going to give you the vibrancy of color, but it is going to give you that like sedimenty kind of purple pink beautifulness. I mean, part of it is this photo is a beautiful photo, but it's been color graded to make those colors pop a bit more, and that's just not, yeah, it's just not what the flower probably even actually looks like. So then we're at the point where we're kind of fighting the capabilities of a physical media to replicate what we're seeing on a screen. So I wanted a cool yellow that I could use on these outer leaves slash sepals slash large overgrown petals. So I grabbed one of the Faber-Castell pigment.
Joe says he has problems with paper warping and wants to know if he's just using too much water.
Could be.
I can't remember the brand name of the paper, but it's a mixed media XL blue pad purchased from Michael's.
Yeah, I know what you're using.
So I recommend that he check out your channel for videos, and he subscribed. And
Cool
said
beans.
thanks.
no, thank you. Okay, so you probably are using too much water because it's a mixed media paper, and even though mixed media papers are advertised as being mixed media, they don't take water the best. What you can do, I don't have any handy. Give me one sec, I'll be right back. If you're doing it in a pad, I swear by these. You can, this is dry, so I can go ahead and clip it. Just use a couple of bulldog clips or binder clips just to hold it down, and that's going to help prevent it from buckling. If you've removed it from the pad, you can try stretching it, or you can just have a bunch of clips going around your art and securing it to whatever surface you're using. Something I like to hold on to is I like to hold on to, let me pause that. I like to hold on to the chipboard backs of watercolor pads. So this is one from like a Blick Studio pad, and it's pretty thick. And I just use this as like a structural support. And let's say this is my watercolor illustration. So I might use the clips on two of the sides just to clip it down. I might use masking tape, like washi masking tape, just to tape it down, or I'll apply like blue painter's tape or washi tape to the back, just kind of loop it over, tape it to the back, and then tape it to the structure just to hold it in place while I'm painting it. But it's all trial and error, and just the fact that you're trying something new is awesome, because like a lot of people talk about wanting to try something new. They want to learn a new media, they want to learn how to do art, and they never really get around to it because they chicken out or they talk themselves out. So it's better, in my opinion, to try something and to kind of hit some walls and to kind of hit some snags than to just like always stay in your comfort zone. Okay, so now I'm going in with like a gamboge hue, a warmer yellow, because we're working in the center here. I'm just going to use this to start kind of defining my color, and I'm just going straight in because this is a pretty saturated area. So what would you guys like to talk about next Saturday?
When you say talk about, you mean you work on?
Yeah, like what do y'all want to work on? It doesn't have to be watercolor. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. All right, now I'm going in with a more orange color. This is cadmium orange hue, and I want to try and catch it mostly while it's still wet.
Joe Bassett said his sister lured him in.
To watercolor? That's awesome.
Sounds like it. And he also said thanks.
I'm always trying to get my younger brother to try new art stuff.
And your mom.
And my mom. And Devin's always trying to get me to make Gundam models. I'm an art pusher. It doesn't have to be perfect to be rewarding and enjoyable. Then I'm going to go back in with some of that same. So that's something that's kind of cool about any of these brush tip, whether it's pigment based or dye based, is if you go in while it's still wet, you can do some blending. You can also pick up some of the other color and move it into other areas. And now I've got cadmium red pale hue. So it's almost like a scarlet or a vermilion in color. And I'm going to let that dry because it's pretty wet, and I want to start pulling some more distinct lines. So I'm trying to think of what else I want to do on this piece. There's definitely some areas I feel need some work, need some improvement. So I'm going to go into one of these purples and try to do a little bit of shadow here on these leaves. And then I'm trying to decide whether I want to grab the Winsor Newton ones or if I want to stick with the, I think I'll probably use both. And I want to start working on these leaves that are kind of the lily pad leaves. So I know a lot of the art supply companies who make these kind of water-based watercolor markers. They would kind of have you think these can be used just like 100% interchangeably with your regular watercolor. You know, and I really like fell into that marketing. You can ask Joseph. And I do use them. But I don't use, like if I'm working on Carapages or like my normal watercolor stuff, I don't normally think to grab my watercolor markers. For how I work, they don't lend themselves the way just regular watercolors would for me. And I don't know if it's because watercolor markers, like this, kind of came onto the scene after I'd already learned watercolor, so you know, like it wasn't as intuitive for me, so it never became this thing I just naturally thought about. So I don't want to like speak for all other artists because I am sure there are artists who they use watercolor markers and that's how they do watercolor, you know. For me, if I were to, I would be open to it if someone would invent a pigment-based pump action watercolor marker that has a nylon brush tip so it actually handles more like a brush. I could definitely see myself using it like that. They do work well for watercolor sketches. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about the product. I'm just saying like when Faber-Castell rolled out their watercolor markers, all of the ad copy was basically like, use in conjunction with your normal watercolors. And I think that's what they really wanted us to do. I mean, they share color names with their other watercolor products. They share pigments. It's just, for me, it wasn't a natural transition. Maybe if I did more abstract art, or maybe if their markers had fewer DOA problems.
So Neftali says, or they're recommending that next stream be what you think about when you're making comic covers. And Joe Bassett, you gotta laugh out of your I'm an art pusher admission. Calvin says, for Gundam model, for the best experience, go with real grade or perfect grade.
Yeah, my brother is really into doing perfect grade models. He also likes the resin ones, but that's more of just like because they're easy and he doesn't have to worry about breaking them. For me, I think if I'd done Gundam models when I was a teenager, I would still enjoy doing them because I think they would have become that like self-soothing activity. but they were kind of hard to come by when I was younger. So now I don't know if I could just like zone out and do them, you know what I mean? Like I feel, especially with my brother hovering over me, I feel like he would be like really concerned. So one of the things that's kind of important to me when using watercolor markers is kind of breaking up that marker mark.
You're saying there shouldn't be an obvious stroke.
I mean, that's what I like, is it shouldn't look like an obvious stroke. But if I can see other artists with other art styles might want that obvious stroke, you know? But I like breaking it up a little bit. In terms of covering a large area with a saturated amount of color though, these are actually really good at that. See, I can just like sketch in shapes, and then if I move quick enough, I can break up that outline with some water. So like, I think maybe an artist who works a lot bigger than I do would probably really get a kick out of these.
Honorably said ain't nothing soothing about praying that this leg doesn't fall off.
Right? Or that I don't snap that like real thin, real brittle plastic, and then people will hear words from me that they didn't know I knew.
Jill says it's looking great.
Thank you.
And Bombi says they've only messed with Zoids.
Oh boy, that's a blast from the past.
Calvin says you can build Gundam models while watching TV.
But that's because you've been doing it for a really long time. So it's like second nature for you. Okay. Unfortunately, ooh, this phone is a hot patat. It's demanding I clear off space. And I don't know that I have space to clear off. So I may not be able to record all of this in like a concise time-lapse fashion. I'll try. Don't you just love watching me like noodle on my phone while we're doing a live stream? It's just like real life. It's like real hangouts.
I mentioned that you have a Gundam video waiting to be premiered from the Japan.
Oh my gosh, of us trying to do touching the face of us trying to do a
Gundam from a
gashapon. Yeah, that's where my brain was going and not doing very well. That was a fiddly little dude. Gundam Pon. Gotcha gun. I'm just being super rude. Some of this, most of this has been edited, but some of this I don't want to delete because I want to promo it as a teaser on Instagram, so I get to play Sophie's Choice with.
Are you sure you can't just copy video to the SD card?
It's on the SD card.
You have 232 gigs.
I do not have that big. It's like a 120 SD card.
It's positively a 200.
It is.
Show you the order.
I'll fight you. I'll fight you. It's honestly just new phone time for me. I did it. That also bought me some dry time. Totally according to plan. I'm going to skip to my loo. I'm going to skip doing another thing of green, and I want to go in with phthalo blue. That's a phthalo blue red shade. Indigo. Let's do indigo. Let's avoid the red shade. No, if I took up Gundams, then I'd have to give up Animal Crossing.
DJ Chroma says what's up.
Hey, good evening.
And Calvin Zero says they bought Gundam kits while in Japan. They are really cheap.
Yes, they are way more affordable than they are here.
Joe Bassett says rude, no, just normal. Smiley face.
Living that life. That on the phone life. We're going to hit the overwork zone on this real soon. So I think... I think I'll do the background and finish up the center. And then maybe we'll call it done. We're new. Woo, woo, woo. I just looked at the time. You guys are very patient hanging out with me for almost 3 hours. I appreciate it, by the way. Time has flown for me. I was really legit surprised when I saw it was 10:30 because I thought it was like 9:45. Okay, so I am using Cadmium Red Deep Hue. And I'm just kind of adding some darker accents. And then I'm just going to add some indigo and some probably sepia into the background. And before I say goodbye to you guys, for those of you who celebrate Easter, I hope tomorrow is a happy, safe, and healthy Easter for you and your families. I hope you find a lot of eggs. For those of you who are celebrating Passover, I hope you are able to find some way to be able to spend that connected time with your families. And Ramadan's coming up soon too, right? Joseph?
Not sure. I thought it was March.
Oh, was it? Oh, you know what? It may have already happened. I thought they were always near Easter, but it may be Easter moves. So it may be that Ramadan's more set in the calendar, and I've just made a false equivocation. But regardless of what you're celebrating, even if you're celebrating being alive, which right now is a very valid thing to be celebrating, I hope that you're able to spend some virtual time with your families, able to stay safe and healthy, well fed. May your Walmart always have toilet paper. That's going to be my new greeting, I think. I like it. I like how the sepia and the blue kind of blend together and they give this really nice mottled color there.
Calvin said Ramadan is on the 24th.
Oh, hey, that is coming up.
Yep.
Thank you.
RB says they have not found a roll since this whole thing started.
Ah, people are the worst. Stop hoarding toilet paper, please. I haven't been to a physical store in Nashville since this has started, but in Luling, Louisiana, where I got kind of stuck in Luling for a little while, which is why I keep bringing it up. It's not like I was like lasciviously traveling, but anyway, they ran out of toilet paper, and then they were only able to get the little 4-packs in, and they had to put up signs to stop people from buying more than one 4-pack, which if you live in a large family, you're going to be going to Walmart like every 2 days because you're going to be going through that toilet paper. But
Calvin says they don't celebrate Ramadan since they're not Muslim, but
yeah.
they do enjoy going to the food bazaar.
Oh man, that's not. Maybe they'll host it later this year. That would be nice. I mean, Nashville says they're going to do the Cherry Blossom Festival at some point, which I hope they do. But I also don't really understand how that's going to work. But also, frankly, the cherry blossoms. Well, usually the cherry blossoms are done anyway.
Yeah, they're
so.
either done or they haven't yet bloomed.
So I mean, they could honestly. I think they should do a summer Matsuri. Legit, that would be fun.
Oh my God, DJ Crolla just said he tried the planner thing you liked last week and they lost it.
Oh. Dang, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That sucks. Ooh, put my hand in wet. And I'm not trying to do any specific thing with the background. I'm just kind of trying to break up the background.
Tanner says Alex says they did a virtual CBF. What's CBF?
CBF? What is a CBF? Book Life? Comic Book Life? No, that can't be right.
Comic book fun?
CBF? No, probably not that either. Help me out. Help me out.
DJ Chroma says it's a beautiful piece.
Oh, thank you.
And Calvin says, oh, summer festival like those in Japan.
Yeah.
Night food market of fireworks.
Yes.
Oh, cherry blossom festival.
Did they really do a digital cherry blossom festival? I mean, like, because that's like what Cheekwood Botanical Garden's doing right now, where they're doing like virtual flower tours. And part of me is really happy they're doing it because, you know, people are getting paid to maintain the garden. So that's job security for those folks. People who don't get a chance to get outside can go look at those beautiful flowers. It just makes me sad because I'm like, I want to be walking in the flowers. But just because I'm sad doesn't mean it's not a good reason to do it. But even if they did a virtual, or even if even if they did in the past tense do a virtual cherry blossom festival, I really would love if the Japanese society here did like a summer matsuri, like with like evening food stalls and fans. I'm laughing because I'm like, oh, I could wear a yukata. I'm sorry. I'm shameful. Okay, so this is just about done. It needs to dry. Obviously, you don't want to just shut the book like that. Oh, now you want to show up on camera. You couldn't be... Come here. Come here. He says no. Is the camera picking him up, or did the camera, like, completely ghost him out?
Yeah, I haven't caught up yet.
Oh, okay. It'll be interesting to see.
Joe Bassett is talking to Calvin. He says one person buys a bunch, second person follows suit. Talking about toilet paper, I assume. Not knowing the first person is buying for a family of 10.
Yeah.
Sort of people with bread and milk for winter storms in the Midwest. Yes, Bowie is showing out.
Yeah. He doesn't see...
Cutting off occasionally, though.
Of course it is. I'm just looking for my white gouache because I was going to add like a couple white highlights and then I was going to be done. Dunzo! Yeah, at first this wasn't like that big a deal to me. COVID, not like it's not a serious thing, but rather in Louisiana we're used to like you can't go to work for 2 weeks. There's a hurricane and your work site is flooded, or you need to buy food to last for 3 weeks because you don't know if you're going to get trapped in the house. Like, yeah, I think a lot of the folks who live up in like the Midwest and up further north understand that situation. So like, and not that I'm not panicked. I'm not advising anyone be panicked. And I'm really fortunate to live in an area where there's like a bunch of delivery services that are still running. So there's no reason for me to really leave the house. And I'm very grateful for that. In Louisiana, that was not the case. I had to go pick up the pizza because they weren't going to deliver it. So I'm very grateful for that. Okay, just going to go in like I always do with a little bit of white gouache. Just going to pop some highlights in here and there. I'm definitely going to consider Tally's suggestion of doing a cover design workshop. Especially if more of you guys are interested in that. I mean, for me, it's really chapter specific. It's really going to depend on what's going on in that chapter. Are you drinking tea over there?
No, just water.
Just water. Hydration. But I also like the idea of us working on a piece of art together from start to finish. Like something that I can like create a line art for you guys earlier in the week and share it. And that way if you just want to like chill out and paint and not have to like draw anything.
Or people could send you a palette, maybe. You share the line art and have people either vote on ballots or send ballots, like from Cooler or whatever.
That's an idea. Or they could even pick like Copic colors.
Yeah, you're assuming people have access to.
Right. But what I mean by that is once a month, Marker Universe releases or used to release their Copic colors of the month. And people would use that as a challenge. And you don't have to use the Copics for that. It's really just a suggestion of the colors. You know what I mean? I mean, Copic won't share your art if you're not using Copic, but you can use whatever sparks joy.
Joe Bassett says Red Lobster delivers and that it was a nice break a base from their frozen meals. And Calvin says, I asked how people were exercising. I said you were walking. I was playing DDR. Calvin says he doesn't really exercise, but he usually walks a decent amount, but hasn't been able to.
Yeah, I think Calvin lives in the city, which makes it, right now it makes it more of a challenge to be able to get out and walk.
And Neftali says she can't find, I assume she can't find any examples of creating front or back covers for shonen manga.
Oh, interesting.
They're looking for videos.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like, although I will say they're not the best about creating readable titles and
Read up.
author names.
Read up. You might be right, but I'm offended. I was tagged in this photo and I want it removed. When it comes to shonen or shoujo, which did you say? Shonen. I am not the one to be able to help with that. I might be able to find something.
Principles for cover design are probably pretty similar.
Well, I don't know, because with shonen, I mean that the words with manga, you're also considering like these are books that were popular enough in their respective magazines to warrant a book. So you already have an audience who's already interested in the product. All right, so I think I'm gonna call this about done. I will ruminate on that idea. I think I have a book that talks about those kind of design. I don't want to say cover designs, but more spot illo designs for. I know I have one for shoujo. I might have one for shonen. They could speak to that better. I can also, if you're interested in that, talk a little bit about the considerations I put into Kara, but I think it would be very different than what someone who's doing an action comic would be considering, because with Kara, a lot of what I'm selling is like, this is a slow-paced, calm comic that you mentally escape into, whereas an action comic or a shonen comic, you're selling the stakes, you're selling the drama, you're selling like, this is the cool magic slash ninja slash pirate technique our main character can do slash crazy sports technique. So I do actually think the considerations are different than the kind of books that I do. But I don't mind talking about what I know about it, but in that regard, there has to be better resources than me, because there's a lot more Japanese channels now where people are drawing manga on stream, or they're drawing like anime sketches on stream. So you might be able to find someone who's talking about it and has a translation. But that, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, that sounds like that would be kind of a tricky thing to find. But I'll do my best to find it. And I'll definitely think about that, and also think about something that might be fun for next week. We've been doing a lot of flowers. I'd really like to do like a frog or like a lizard, something like that. So next week we might be doing a alcohol marker frog together or something. If we do go that route, I will, like I did this week, I'll create the line art ahead of time, scan it, and share it on Patreon, as well as on Gumroad for folks who just want to like chill out, relax, and color. Why don't I bring up the chat? Sure.
Rather than me reading it.
Sure.
We're signing off.
Oh, I'm so glad you had a good evening, Jill. It was good hanging out, and hopefully I'll see you next week as well. Thank you so much, Joe. Hopefully I'll see you next week. Yeah, that is a lot of shonen art. It's just like dramatic pose, cool pose. So yeah, maybe frogs next week. All right, guys, it is almost 11, so thank you guys for hanging out with me for 3 hours. I hope you guys made some art, even if you did something completely different. It's always cool when we make art together. And I'll see you guys again next week.